at ya, mad at ya. Tell you what's master, coming at ya, coming at ya. Rhyme style disaster, coming at ya, mad at ya. Tell you what's master, coming at ya.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Charles Love, alongside my co-hosts Wilfred Riley and Christy Kelly. And we are joined this week by Dean Phillips. He is a businessman, former Minnesota congressman, or as he likes to put it, recovering congressman, and my favorite title, common sense advocate. Man, do we need more of those. Dean, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you all, Charles and Christy and Wilfred.
So I was thinking, I was excited about having you on, and then I'm like, I got a little worried because I'm like, I don't know how we're going to fit all of the crazy in this little tiny hour box we have. So I'm like, where do we start? I got to leave you room so you can say if at the end, if I like a disclaimer, if you want to save yourself any bona fides and say what you think is going poorly or what you don't like administration. So, because if you disagree with any Democrat, you become MAGA adjacent Hitler XYZ, no matter what you say about it. So I'll leave you that space at the end. But I want to know where to start. And I figured I'd break it into two categories. The Democrats pre-election and post-election. So this is my own personal feeling. I won't put this in these words in your mouth, but I think they've been a little crazy before and after. But the crazy as it had its own different flavors and machinations as it went along. So if we start with before, with what's going on with the Democrats, I like to start with, you're a good guy to have on because you were the co-chair of the House Democratic Policy and Communications Committee, which you resigned from. You can tell us why. But that means you kind of saw the sausage being made, right? You're trying to talk communications. So before the election, what was wrong with the Democrats?
Well, Charles, I have to say, I don't think there's a whole lot different with the Democratic Party before the election and after, other than confidence. I think Democrats were overconfident before the election, have lost that confidence, and nothing's changed. In fact, the only thing that's new is the exposure of the fact that it's rudderless, it's somewhat leaderless. I don't think its principles and values are well articulated, and most Americans, including myself, don't really understand any longer what the Democratic brand stands for. And you're right, I did see the sausage made, and it was uglier and smelled worse than you could possibly imagine. And I knew it would smell. And that's why, I am in recovery right now, but it's temporary because my mission is really to restore faith in government, inspire people to participate in elections, particularly primaries. And I think most importantly, and the part I'd really like to talk about is creating competition for a duopoly that has a monopoly on our electoral system. And I think there's nothing more anti-American than that.
Wow, well, that's good to know that you're thinking about getting back in the fray and you're not running away. But Will, he made a good point. You don't know what his response is going to be, and right off the bat, I like the fact that he said the crazy hasn't changed, but the confidence level is different. Let's start there. Talk about, because he's right, I didn't think about it, but they had such a huge level of confidence that they felt that they could say or do anything and it wouldn't affect them. So what do you think about his point that they were overconfident?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a problem for both parties. I mean, I'm a registered independent, as you know. Christy will get on me and you about this. Yeah, I lean more toward the Republicans, but this is an issue that in political science is pretty widely recognized. In the USA, we only have two political parties that matter. No offense to my libertarians out there. So we don't have 10 like they do in Europe. We just saw Germany hold an election where they had like the Communist Party basically got 34% among women, the fascist party, kind of the AFD. They have a solid position on immigration, but they say a bunch of other crazy stuff. They got 25% among young men. Then you have like the Greens that dress like forced elves and the Christian Democrats and all this other stuff. They have 7 or 8 of them. In the USA, everyone's packed into one of the two. So, I mean, the Republicans really run across the gamut from kind of guys with neckties on through, Chris Rufo style standard operatives, through Bible believing Christians, through MAGA hatted Walmart dads, and then into some pretty dissident right stuff that's becoming a little awkward. And then through Black conservatives. I mean, Christie, obviously, proud American, great individual. So all that's in there, and that's kind of packed together, not always cohesively. The Democrats, Dean might disagree, but have an even bigger tent that's got a lot of crazy in it. So I mean, you're literally going from recent Muslim immigrants to radical feminists. I look at them, I wonder how they keep that coalition together in any sense. I mean, undocumented workers over to union laborers, man. It's there's a lot there, and there's not really a congruent message other than sometimes like screw the man. So yeah, I think that's an issue, and I think that there is a lot of crazy messaging used by the parties to get the base out in primaries. Because I mean, again, that's another thing in the USA, you have to get through your party's primary to run in the general. So you're not going to get the sort of, I mean, if you ever manage to get a kind of mainstream candidate through the primary into the general, where you've got what was her name? The female Republican that was running against Trump for a couple of months.
Nikki Haley?
Yeah, Nikki Haley. Sorry, it's been a long day. But yeah, if you got a sort of Nikki Haley, someone else ticket out in the general running against either Trump or Biden, I mean, I really think candidates like that probably 60-70% of the time would win by a pretty good margin. If you look at the betting sites, usually 4 to 5% in the national election. Those candidates are never going to win in a primary in either party. So what do you do about that? I mean, you often see things like Trump smashing in the primaries, brutalizing solid candidates like DeSantis, Haley, just kicking them out of the way. Bernie Sanders almost won the Democratic primary. Bernie Sanders is about, two Karl Marx beard lengths away from being a communist. So we've got to figure out something to do about that, but I have no real suggestions.
Christy, I got a question for you as the resident Republican. Will also added an interesting point to what Dean said in that you have this, because you only have two parties, people are, and sometimes we don't do it, which is why you beat me and Will up about doing this, but people are often forced into a box that they may not fit. And my argument has always been, when at the height of this political divisiveness, when people were writing articles every day um, about the two sides, the right and the left. My argument was you're flawed at the beginning because there are no two sides. And they look at me like I'm crazy, but I'm like, no, there are people out there who are very pro-life, right? And that's really important to them. They kind of vote on that issue, which would make them right-wing, right? But they're, okay with higher taxes and immigration and some other things. How do you put them in a box? If the most polarizing issues, they're on either side of them. And Will just made a point that this tent included a lot of kind of varied groups of people, and it does. I mean, he mentioned some on the left, you can mention ones on the left, but it seems like the ones on the left seem to be more likely to be diametrically opposed to each other, right? So like the literal, we're all about LGBTQ plus, so we're going to go to the rally with the people who want to kill people who are LGBTQ plus because we both happen to hate Trump. So what are your thoughts on that, as far as the political landscape?
I mean, I think we are going to see the continuation of people being dug into, whether you're red or blue. I don't know how that changes. And I'm not one of those people that agree with the two-party system. I have libertarian roots. So I would love for it to be opened up and have, political parties, a variety of them actually be viable. I just don't know how America gets there. And I don't know that we're ever going to get there. I don't see it forming because I think we are dug in. But I do see two different types of people. I see people that are politically astute, like you guys, who just choose to not be part of a political party. That way you can equally rail against both of them. And
That is
and have
not
the,
why,
Lazy
by the way.
cowardice.
Don't change the topic of this episode because
and
that
have the
is not
freedom
why.
to do so. But the average person out there,
Mhm.
they are just, they're just kind of worried about their values. So they may cross the line. They may, only vote for the president and skip everybody else. They
That's
may
right.
only vote for local. I don't think they're so dug into, go red team, go blue team as, maybe those of us on the show.
Dean,
Mhm.
she makes a point. All the points. This is why you come here and watch this show because everyone makes great points, even the guests. But where I think that Christy's right, but I think the issue is, and you can tell me if you agree or not, but I think we saw this in the election, in that people don't put them now what people do, we know there's only two parties, whatever happens there, but people don't put themselves in the box, and like Chrissy said, they're voting their values. The problem is the candidates we got were really polarizing, but the Democrats, so Trump might be more polarizing as a person than some of the
Mhm.
other candidates, but the parties, the people who disagree with the Republicans have their policy issues, same thing on the other side in general. But the Democrats as a whole tend at that time to have shifted so far away from what the average person wanted.
Mhm.
People found themselves caught in some weird conundrum that they ever been. They used to always talk about we vote for the lesser of two evils, but this
Yeah.
was different. This was, I think Trump is a jerk,
Hmm.
but I absolutely hate wide open borders. There's too much crime in my neighborhood, and my
Hmm.
politicians are laughing about it and gaslighting me and telling me it's not happening.
Right.
I think we should stand behind and support and have compassion for all of Americans, regardless of their background. But there's this weird obsession with people's gender ideology, their gender expression, and who they date. I don't care who they date, but I don't think
Mhm.
my politicians should be obsessed with it. And I definitely don't think they should be pushing it on my 6, 7, and 8-year-old kid. So what am I supposed to do? My only option is to vote for the guy who I think is kind of nutty or to
Mhm.
stay home. So I guess if you agree that that's what people saw, I guess it's twofold in the sense that Christie's right that people are voting their values, but if neither party is really focused on their values, either one, but one of them
Mhm.
just seems to be out and out crazy and antagonistic to it. So the Republicans aren't focused on my values. The Democrats are trying to stab my values in the face. What
Mhm.
am I supposed to do? And back to the Democrats, why don't they realize that?
Well, I think it's fair to say, first of all, Charles, I think what you just articulated is probably where most Americans stand. I mean, center right, center left. What you just said was pretty much where I think most Americans are. Be reasonable and decent and kind to your neighbor, but don't impose your values on me, especially as it relates to my children. And don't prioritize something that we're trying to make very clear is not our priority. And in America and around the world, safety, security, and economic well-being will always be the drivers of people's votes. And of course, they tend to vote out of fear more than out of hope. And but back to both parties, because I think, look, I don't think either party represents most Americans right now. So we have to pick and choose. Imagine if you could either be just Christian or Muslim, and you had to identify with one of the two, or you could only buy Coke or Pepsi. My whole argument on this subject is why in the United States of America do we allow one industry, one category to have a monopoly on something as important as anything, which is democracy? The job of government is to inspire competition, not to prevent it, plain and simple. And that's something Democrats and Republicans should agree on. And that's why we are not a binary nation. None of us are perfectly Jewish or perfectly black or white. And yet the parties try to position us accordingly. And that's offensive to all of us. And that's why I'm pretty disgusted. And I think that's why most Americans are. And I think the answer, Wilfred, you mentioned this. The parties don't want people voting in primaries. Only 12, 15% of Americans do. They don't want that because they want the activists to be able to choose their candidates. Nikki Haley, if she'd been the nominee for Republicans, she would have won by 25 points. If I had been the nominee, if I had somehow overcome Joe Biden, I think I could have beat Trump. That was my whole argument. Whichever side, collapsed, or whichever side broke the dam, if you will, first would have won, I would have argued. But the parties don't want that. And my inspiration, what I'm trying to do is inspire people to participate in primaries because I think that would solve a lot of our problems. More Americans participating, by definition, would generate more competent, common sense candidates, allow us to be better represented, and break this monopoly. And I just don't think we're living in an era where anybody is perfectly fitting into either party's category. And as the candidates become further and further extreme, so the country is begging for more centrism, the candidates are becoming more extreme, and there's this vacuum that nobody has filled. And frankly, with the brilliance of so many American entrepreneurs, nobody of that capacity and experience and resourcing has ever attempted to break this monopoly. And that's why my argument is we can argue policy, we can argue how crazy the Democrats have become or the Republicans, but at the end of the day, the only solution is competition for the brands that are not satisfying Americans' needs. And I'll close with the fact that over 50% of Americans now do not consider themselves affiliated with either party.
You just set me up perfectly, real quick, Will, because I was going to say what you said makes sense, but it's kind of confusing to me because in some ways it works in in some oppositional way to what you're arguing. In that you want more people to vote in primaries,
Mhm.
but if more people are a growing number of people are moving away from the party, they are actually going to be less likely. I am
Yes.
one of those guilty parties, right?
Mhm.
All of my friends who are center right and conservative say, but you have to vote. No, I don't, right? I don't want nothing to do. I'll let you all pick your crazies and I'll
Mhm.
decide what I want to do. Pick better people and then
Mhm.
I'll choose in general. So that's one problem. But then
Yeah.
on the other side, even if we've tried to do, like to Christie's concern, the more party situation, because we never started there, you got the right to have more parties. Some of them are just struggle because they're not that good. But the
No,
other
there are
thing is they
barriers to
would
entry, though,
never.
Charles. I hate to interrupt, but there are intentional, well-designed, and
Oh,
well-crafted
that was
barriers.
my
Yeah.
point, is that you
Hmm.
can't really so you could start your own party, but you can't really have a party. The signature threshold is 10 times higher. You're never going to raise the money. So people, there's so many, and then the one thing that'll be the one time the Democrats and the Republicans would get together and join
Exactly.
forces is to
Exactly.
weaken anybody else who's trying to eat out of our trough.
Uh-huh.
So you can't really create a third party because the two parties are too powerful and they crush you. And then I don't see how
No, I think you can, though,
the
Charles. I really
primary
believe,
will work.
yeah, I really believe you can. First of all, after Ross Perot performed so well in
Mhm.
1992, both parties in most states colluded to raise the threshold for ballot access because they recognized that an independent was a threat. And you can go back and look at the history. Starting a party is actually really easy. The challenge is because of these high thresholds for signatures, they make it very difficult. My proposition would be solicit Americans to invest in something new, something in which they build from scratch. They literally become investors in a new party, common sense party, and then match those dollars with a significant amount of resources from someone like a Michael Bloomberg or a Mark Cuban, where there might be $1 billion sitting in a party account that would afford the opportunity for this new party to select thoughtful candidates who do not solicit dollars from anyone. They spend their time campaigning and serving in office, not 50% of their time raising money. I would argue that Americans would be thrilled to support something new, something reasonable, and a party in which they know is not beholden to the donors that have both sides completely in a chokehold. And that's how you do it. And by the way, no one's tried it really well. There's the Forward Party. Andrew Yang's done a nice job, but working with very few resources and not a significant platform. But the interest is there. And coming from the state of Minnesota, where Jesse Ventura, the independent, was the precursor to Donald Trump many years ago, the appetite for the right person at the right time with the right construct is surely there. And it is not impossible. And I would argue that I think what the parties are doing is a form of collusion that is preventing competition. And there's nothing more dangerous and nothing more important for us to consider addressing.
Last thing, won't you need two parties instead of one?
Say it again.
Won't you need two parties instead of one?
Won't you need two? So there be
Yeah,
four parties?
this new party, would one be enough?
I think one would be first of all, here's the truth. And you all know that the margins in the Congress right now are so narrow that if let's say a new party, a common sense party, elected two members of the House and one senator, that could be the most powerful party in the United States of America by definition, because they're the swing votes. Right now, there are a lot of us, myself included, that were very independent minded, willing to break with our party on occasion. But the punishment, there's no reward for doing so.
Right.
And politics, like human life, it is about self-preservation. So that's why you need a third entity, if you will, that actually would reward those who are willing to be bold or courageous. And it doesn't take many. I'm not talking about winning the White House and having a majority in Congress. I'm talking about a few seats, starting to look at state legislative races, city council races, building infrastructure for a 21st century, thoughtful, centrist, common sense party. And by the way, that doesn't mean moderate. It can be a party of values, but the key is problem solving, rather than the imposition of values. And I think that's what government in America should be for. We're not supposed to be injecting religion and our values into the electorate. We're supposed to be managing the damn country, protecting it, and ensuring the economy is strong for people to get to work and provide for their families. And neither party is doing that, period.
Wilford Riley.
Yeah, I mean, so we've gone over quite a few topics here. I mean, I think the one I would get back to is the female political scientist Laura Hatcher uses the term, I think, the crazy off to describe American politics. And there's a core idea here, which is that whoever stops doing what seems to be just crazy, incoherent shit could easily win 3 or 4 elections. So I think all this ties into one basic thing, like whatever whichever party proved willing to work in this theoretical situation with kind of the balance party, I think would gain a great deal of support as stuff got done. And I mean, a lot of people are old enough to remember stuff getting done. I mean, Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich hated each other, but there was a period of time when basic things like benefits reform, the closure of some, frankly, pretty antiquated military bases, a government surplus rather than a deficit actually happening. Those things were pretty consistent year over year. And when you ask people who their favorite politicians are, they tend to say someone like Bill Clinton or Ronald Reagan around the time of victory in the Cold War. They don't really pick modern extreme candidates, often, if at all. I mean, so like the example of the crazy off, what you see this all over the place where you have the pendulum effect. I mean, an example that comes to my mind from a debate on the internet today was like you have extreme sexism in the USA for a long time. Women can't open bank accounts. This is slightly exaggerated, but easily until 1973. So you have backlash, kill all men and 4B style feminism for quite a while. Not exactly the same thing, but Kill All Men was a very common internet campaign. There's still shirts you can buy online with a Google search. And now you seem to be saying equally stupid backlashing in the reverse direction, where if you Google the phrase repeal the 19th, there's a petition with, I think, 4 million signatures where people are now arguing women should not be able to vote. And this effect prevails across a whole lot of arenas where kind of dumbassery brings back dumbassery in the other direction, and that causes reverse dumbassery. And you never just stop on maybe you should have a basic civil rights law that prohibits discrimination, and people should have a social norm against extreme sexism, really, in any direction. No one just comes forward and says the logical thing. The person who comes forward and says the logical thing, though, would be applauded by about 85% of people. If I'm saying anything additional that's really building on what we've all been saying, but yeah, someone should do that. This is
But then
also
they'll be
happening.
primaried, Wilford. They'll be primaried by their party, and only
Of course, yeah.
10% of the people vote, so that common sense person gets ejected. That's the disincentive for being reasonable. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, we agree on that. It sounds like you have some potential solutions there. It's a real problem though.
Yeah.
One last sentence from me that we're also seeing this with race relations, right? Where you have extreme racism, the response is contemporary DEI, et cetera, policies. Those clearly go over the top. You have consultants, $800 an hour, Ashley the Lion, and so on. We've all seen them in business. The
Mhm.
problem with whiteness, an 18-day seminar. Okay, now you're seeing the
Not
actual
long enough.
response.
Not long enough.
Yeah, it's got to be at least a month, right? I mean, like the many months our ancestors spent on those ships in the Tropic of Cancer, anyway. And now you're seeing the response though. Like the page, Blacks Taking L's, Blacks Taking Losses on Twitter just hit 200,000 followers. So I logged onto social media today, and you see people celebrating this. Like that's right, they'll never recover for this. The Negroes and Black guys are responding, and everyone's using all these crazy racial insults.
Mhm.
So again, you have problem, attempted solution goes way too far. You wind up with essentially reverse racism. Asians can't get into most top colleges, and now seriously, I mean, there's a lawsuit launched right now that I saw on the law wires. I still keep track of legal media. A young Asian American applicant was rejected from every school in the University of California system. You guy might be off by one, but he had a 1590 SAT. He had a 5.9 GPA. They have a nonsensical grading system in California. But anyway, it was rejected from every one of them. Now, in the lower UCs, like Davis and Merced, I mean, the average GPA for black kids is like, or SAT, whatever, SAT for black kids is like 12, 20, white kids like 13, 10. This guy had a 1590, but apparently they think they have too many Asians, so just nope. He's applying out of state right now, but you've wound up with this kind of thing. The response to this, though, has been frank racism, and I think there's going to be a backlash to that. So now if someone were to say, well, there's very little real racism in America today, which used to be my opinion, it's becoming increasingly difficult to say that. So anyway, pendulum problem.
Mhm.
Well, but to that, then, Dean, since he brought up the social issues, that is definitely something I don't really. I mean, you talked about the sausage being made earlier. What is the point? I mean, I don't understand the obsession, I guess. And they really slick, they're getting worse at it, but they were slick about it in the beginning. They had found a way to be obsessed about these very, boutique niche kind of issues, but then
Mhm.
frame it that if you just question it like, man, I don't have anything against black people, but I don't think it's fair to give them preference. You're a racist. I don't have anything against gay people, but I don't understand why you're why you're focused. Why it's not even that. I've said this before and we've had plenty of trans, gay, and whatever guests, and
Mhm.
most of them agreed, with the exception of a couple. It's like, I don't think it's anti-LGBTQ plus. Do whatever you want with your parade and all that kind of
Mhm.
stuff. But to say that I don't think it's government's role to promote it, in the sense that if you're going to allow there to be a Pride Month, do your thing. But I'm
Mhm.
in New York City and in June, on the side of every bus, in every public space, right?
Yeah.
So now the government is involved in it. I'm like, I don't understand why the government needs to be involved in it. You're a homophobe, right?
Yeah.
So that became the obsession. He talked about the pendulum. We have non-violent offenders spending too much time in prison. Most people are like,
Mhm.
that's fair. And then you see people like, I don't know if you all remember the story. This is one that hasn't been mentioned in a while, so I like to bring this up. The guy who was swinging the axe at people in McDonald's in New York City about 2 years ago. They released him with nothing. They just let him, they arrested him, and then they just let him go, right?
Mhm.
No one in their right minds thinks that that is nonviolent, right? So, but then the Democrats would argue for it, which seems crazy. But the crazy part is then they double down. And lastly,
Mhm.
they ran when they were confident, as Dean said, on racism is increasing. White supremacy is the biggest problem in the country. MAGA just means racist. They're all racist. So they, whether right or wrong, they vilified Trump for 8 years, called him racist, called him Hitler, said he needed to be banned, convicted him 57 times. I don't know, was it 33 is the real number? They did everything they
Yeah,
could.
34 felonies.
Yeah,
It's
they
it's
convicted him.
each entry in the QuickBooks is how you charge that as a lawyer. Like it's just
Mhm.
it's bullshit.
They did everything they could. Then, for whatever reason, maybe it's crazy, every BIPOC, I'm using their language, I'm
Mhm.
almost throwing up in my mouth, but every BIPOC group increased for Trump, including gays and trans people. Every
Mhm.
group, Hispanics, but he won Hispanic men outright. And their response the next day was, it's whitewash. It proves, all this does is prove that the country is racist. Can they really be that crazy, Dean?
I don't know where to start.
I want to say they can't
I'll tell
be.
you.
I
I'll
want to
tell you,
say they can't
I
be, but I don't
yeah.
know.
Well, I come from Minneapolis, and you can imagine
Mm.
how the George Floyd murder affected my community first, and this country, and frankly, the world, as you all know. And so many times in my political career, I use the refrain, two things can be true at once. I think I may have. Did you lose me here for a second? Oh, there we go.
Yep.
Two things can be true at once. There are too many police forces in the country that are poorly trained, and have officers that do things that are shameful to all the good officers in the country. And Derek Chauvin was one of those guys. Everyone knew he was. The Minneapolis Police Department had a reputation. They knew who those people were too. And that's true. And I'm a white man. I never had to have the talk, with my daughters. A lot of my friends did, and I've always understood this. But when the murder happened, um, it was actually white liberals in Minneapolis that took the banners and started actually imposing what they thought were their appropriate ally values on our communities of color. And it was actually North Minneapolis, the home to the largest black community in the Twin Cities, that suffered the worst because cops stopped doing their jobs. They were afraid to. And these are the two truths. And when you the pendulum you're talking about, it's another argument for another party, because if the pendulum can only swing all the way to the left or all the way to the right, wouldn't it be nice to have somewhere for that pendulum to stop somewhere in the middle? And you've seen how shame and threats of being shamed drive way too many politicians to make the wrong decisions, including many of those in my home state. And I only share that because it was such an example of two things being true, and a thoughtful leader, thoughtful party would simply acknowledge it. Instead, we use that as weaponry against one another. And you were either you were defund the police, meaning get rid of them, right? Or you were for police strangling black men. And that's just, that is the fault of both parties. That's not how most of us, I mean, my goodness. Yes, we have creeps in America, but that's the problem. And so the crazy to me is not I don't think that's the norm in both parties, but it's the crazy that get the platform. They get the eyeballs, Fox and Newsmax and MSNBC. They don't want to put normal people on because who wants to watch normal? They want to be provoked. And as a result, we then associate the brand with the people that we just saw on evening cable news who are misdefining the squad on the left, right? The Freedom Caucus on the right. And that's not where most people are. So I don't think both parties are crazy. I think the leaders are weak. I think we've let the least competent, least experienced, least able somehow be the torchbearers for each side. And that's something that strong leadership can and should address. But right now, it's sure not happening on the left.
Christy, um, I know you're still doing your call center work, but let me ask you this though. I want to play devil's advocate for a minute because everything Dean is saying is good and it sounds true, but I'm kind of a cynic, and maybe he just has his his hopes set a little too high.
Mhm.
Maybe people really do want the crazy. Maybe if a normal person was on MSNBC or Fox or Newsmax, people would shut it off. I mean, it's got to be some reason why. Now, I'll give you that there's a large percentage of normal people that are tuned out, so they're not even paying attention to what's
Mhm.
going on. But, Will post some interesting things on Twitter, and I see what he says and the debates and how people respond. Those people seem to like crazy. So what do you think about that? Is it is it really what people want? This
Yeah, I mean, it kind of tees up nicely as what was going through my head. So I have 2 points. I like what you're talking about, Dean, but I don't know if now is the moment. And everything is like about timing because right now, if you think about who the Republicans are floating for 2026, it's Stephen A. Smith. I mean, are you serious?
wait, back up,
Like the
back. What's
sports
happening now?
commentator?
Huh?
They are talking about that Stephen A. Smith may run for president in 2026. And at first I thought it was a
2028.
joke.
Or eight? You mean
2028. 2028. At first I thought it was a joke.
Like from ESPN?
Hmm.
Yes, I'm
Hmm.
surprised you haven't seen this,
huh?
but
Yeah, he's
now
got a big following. Hmm.
right. So
Yep.
now I'm seeing it more often.
And
Yep.
wait, and he
If
would run as a Republican?
he would run as a Democrat.
Democrat.
Oh, okay. I thought he
Hmm.
was a
And
Republican.
then AOC, right, is the other
Hmm.
one that's out there. And then on the other side, you have, MAGA. So right now we have the extremes, and anyone in the middle, I think like people have said, just kind of gets lost because there are these two loud, really polarizing, but figures that get all the media
But wait a
attention.
minute, I have to push back a little bit. I didn't hear about the Stephen A. Smith, but I hear kind of comments that he makes and the little tours he's been doing. And my sense is that he is trying to be he's trying to move whatever his thoughts were before. He's trying to sound like
Hmm.
the reasonable. I saw him on Bill Maher. Bill Maher would say the one thing, he had him on with a bunch of liberals. Some liberal politician was like, "No, we just need to be louder. If people would only listen to us." And Stephen A. Smith was like, "No, we tried that. What you're saying is stupid, and nobody wants it." So he didn't say anything about running for president, but he did seem to be trying to move to that. I got friends on both sides. I hang out with Sean Hannity, but I got Democrat bona fide. I think he's trying to do exactly what Dean is talking about.
Stephen A is on all sides of the issue at
Hmm.
different points in time. Like
True,
I just can't listen to him because he's so disingenuous all the time. I mean, like one
but
day
he's
you'll
not
catch him
extreme.
and he'll be saying this. And he is extreme. He's extreme in his
Yes,
language.
but he's
He's
trying to make himself out
loud.
not to be.
Yeah, no.
No.
Anyways, my point is is that I love what Dina's talking about for him, right? I just don't know if now is the moment because America seems to like the crazy on both sides. My other question for Dean would be, I'm sure you've looked at the Libertarian Party because we're acting like a third party doesn't exist, and it's a pretty
Yep.
large,
Yep.
third party. So and they fluttered, and a lot of how they're fluttering has been of their own making, right?
Sure.
But how would your party fare any different than what the
Mhm.
Libertarian Party has not been able to kind of break through, and they've been around for a long time?
Yeah, in my estimation, Christy, it's harder to reposition a brand than it is to create something new. It's the same way it's kind of harder to, it's more expensive to renovate a home often than it is to build a new one. And I think the same is true in politics. That each of these brands, the Republican, Democratic brands, the Libertarian brand, to most Americans doesn't have much meaning. But Americans do like new. They like to be participants. They like to be pioneers. They like to be early adopters, and they like to be part of a solution. And it's a rare, rare occurrence when a man like Donald Trump can literally take over a political party. I mean, that's not going to happen too often. And I don't see ways to reform in a traditional sense, the Democratic Party. And that means, the same way, this is back to Coke and Pepsi. Imagine if that's just all we had and we just said, okay, well, they're so big and they own the shelves and the distribution and the retailers are in cahoots with them. But it takes a Red Bull. And in this case, it was actually a German, I think it was, came to America and realized he couldn't get onto the shelf. So he hires a bunch of down and out folks around the country who have a pickup truck and they start delivering the stuff to the stores. He had to break down the system because it was designed to prevent him from succeeding. And that's kind of I like that American ingenuity. I'm not saying it's going to succeed. All I'm saying is there are enough talented people in America, center right, center left, that want common sense, competent leaders. We certainly have the resources. And no one can tell me that a well-conceived strategy cannot elect a couple members of Congress and one United States senator, and success begets success. And part of it is trying, because I am so sick and tired every night. If I turn on cable news or I listen to podcasts or I just go to a coffee shop, everyone is complaining and no one is coming up with solutions.
Right.
Yeah, policy solutions, but you can't impact those. So I'm trying to pivot a little bit from the complaining to the ideation of what actually might unify Americans. Because if we don't have a war and we don't have a disaster, I don't see anything bringing us together other than the potential to invest alongside one another and actually take back some control of representative democracy that I think has been ceded to two private corporations, which most Americans do not even realize.
Wow. Okay. I like what you're saying. I want to, but so I want to help by having you flush this out.
Mhm.
You bounce this stuff off of you, so we can move this thing forward, and you can make this happen. You're going to start this party.
I'm not saying no, don't. I didn't say I'm starting a party.
So
I'm just saying
that actually is just
that
a practical
I
kind
just
of
said that I
business
think
question that I have for the guest. Like,
He was
so
quick to do it. Wait, time out. No,
how's this going to
somebody
happen? Like,
should.
are you the guy that's planning on initiating this, or is there?
No,
Do you guys have focus groups, search committees going on right now?
he,
Is this a thing
he
that
said
is
that
this
the
a thing
way he
someone's
ran
going to
for
do?
president. He was like, somebody needs to primary Biden. I'm going to run. Well, first of all, with somebody else out there, please run. Somebody's got to run. I don't want to do it. So is somebody else going to do it? I don't know if I have to, but somebody else should do it.
I'm not. All I know is, having traveled the country, served in Congress 6 years, had a multi-month presidential primary campaign, that the number of Americans. Oh, I think I lost my video here. Sorry.
Keep going. Go ahead.
The number the number of Americans who approach me consistently with salutations, but also with the aspiration of having an alternative is a very, very meaningful number. And I'm not sure if you guys can hear me right now, because
We can hear you.
Okay. So it's there's an appetite that is just so seemingly obvious. If you look, and then if you look at affiliation, more Americans now identify as independents. If you go to your faith community, your family, your friends, people are really sick and tired of this, and yet there's no alternative. And I'm not saying it's easy. There are a lot of parties out there. They're just poorly managed. They don't have a lot of resources, and they're not compelling, and they don't have a brand that appeals to Americans. You look at what Elon Musk is doing right now at the federal level. The man, no matter what people think of him, the man is a force of nature. He's a talent. He does not fail. And you take people like him, and there are thousands with the experience and the resources to simply give Americans a choice. And that's kind of what this is about. And I saw firsthand in Washington, when I was a member of Congress, that most of us wanted to work together. Most of us wanted to solve problems. Most of us wanted to spend our time doing the work, not raising the money. By the way, I was the only member of Congress who took no PAC money, no lobbyist money, no money from members of Congress, and I didn't give them. And I didn't have a leadership PAC. I was the only one out of 535 people. My colleagues were spending 10,000 hours per week raising money, right? Most of us wanted to get the work done, but our parties, if you want to become a leader in your party, you better darn right stay on track and not get out of line, because you will not have a chance if you do, right?
Right.
If you so much as vote against your party, you will get primaried, and they make it clear. So most of us wanted to. And I left there with this mission, not to serve in office again necessarily, but to at least inspire the possibility of just creating that space and place for the decent people on both sides who right now are becoming extinct. And the number of people on the right and left that I saw, the moderate, reasonable, decent, thoughtful people that I saw over just 3 terms leave and be replaced with ever further left and ever further right people, it was astounding. And you take people like Richie Torres, by the way, my dear friend,
Yeah.
I think one of the shining stars of the Democratic Party, you know, a young man of color, a gay man from, I think, with a Puerto Rican heritage.
Right.
He didn't fit nicely into the Democratic box. It really infuriated the left, right? Even though he shares the values, as did I. He's a perfect example of someone who just, I don't know where someone like Richie can go. He can't become a leader.
Right.
No way could he get the nomination for probably a Senate seat or the presidency.
Right.
So what do people like him do? What do people like me? What do we do? What do reasonable Republicans do? Nothing. And if there's no home and we don't build that home, we're going to be living in tents.
Right. And that's definitely a good case for the other party, but you make a good
Mm-hmm.
point. And you and I talked about Richie Torres here in New York, and I watched him get attacked for, like you say, black
Yeah.
gay man, pro Israel. What's wrong with him?
Yeah.
When Trump was deporting violent criminals and
Exactly.
people and politicians and the elite out on the streets saying this is wrong. Who's advocating for a violent criminal to be here? Richie's like, what are you
No.
talking about? The people I represent are glad they're gone. They're cheering. They're coming to my office saying, thank you, Mr. President. Didn't vote for you.
Yeah,
Don't
but you
support
won't
your
see many
leadership.
Democratic elected officials say that because they're afraid that if they actually say we don't want criminals in this country, that they're going to get attacked and lose their standing. It's so ridiculous.
It's ridiculous, but to your point, I mean, which may lend itself to the point you're making about a third party,
Mhm.
is that you said yourself as you sat there in Congress, you watched those number of reasonable people dwindle.
Mhm.
It happens because they see, I mean, obviously the parties are strong and they can put money and resources. They ran you out, you didn't do the right thing, so they primary you. That's people need to understand. Dean is a common sense guy, Democrat in Minnesota who won a Republican seat and then won re-election twice with large margins.
Mhm.
How does this man leave Congress? It's crazy, right? The way they treat Richie Torres, the way they treated Tulsi Gabbard. You tell you on both sides. If you the way you're treated by the Republican Party, if
Mhm.
you're not in line
Liz Cheney,
with
I
with
mean,
with, with
the most
Trump.
conservative member of the House conference, the daughter of the former vice president,
So it doesn't matter
excommunicated.
whether they're right or wrong.
Yeah.
My point is that people are watching that and they're
Hmm.
saying, why should I run for office? I
Yep.
mean, it's not worth the headache. I
Right.
mean,
Right.
so it's going to make it harder. Maybe that's what I'm saying. Maybe a competent party will allow those people to get energized to run again.
Hmm.
But I look
Yeah.
at, what happened in a lot of these cases and how they primary. I don't know if you are, I think I mentioned this before, but this was before it really got bad. But I don't know if you all remember when the party started to shift, because being, you know, reasonably pro-choice or pro-life was common in both parties for a while.
Hmm.
Something had to happen to have one party where not one person is pro-life. That seems odd. You telling
Yep.
me no Democrat is pro-life? Some of them are just, and the
It's
reason for
just straight party line
Yep.
pretense. Like,
but
I mean,
but it's
Dean said
because
that
of
a
Dan
couple times. Like, people are
Rostenkowski
just
in our
lying. Like, they're no
Illinois, Will.
atheist Republicans. What's up,
Hmm.
Joe?
But it's because of Dan Rostenkowski in our own Illinois, right? We had a
Hmm.
Democrat congressman who was the last pro-life Democrat, openly pro-life Democrat. And the Democrats spent millions of dollars to primary him until he lost, right?
Yep.
They didn't succeed the first time, but they did the second time. So they basically said, you can't be in here with your values. right? So I mean, that's gonna scare people away. And if you're
Yeah,
successful, you're like, I don't need the headache.
the Democrats are actually even crazier on this than the Republicans. Like I've read both party platforms, and the official position of the
Mm.
Democrats is that abortion is between, I think the language is a woman and her doctor until birth. So like the official party position is abortion is just perfectly valid for 9 months. Now, very few people are actual psychopaths, so there aren't that many abortions performed at 9 months. Like
Right,
6 months and on is only 10,000. Oh, it is 10,000 abortions every year, but that's out of a million abortions.
right.
But I mean, both of those figures would be staggering if you were genuinely pro-life and you viewed abortion as exactly equivalent to murder. My take on this is very few people logically do because we just sort of accept that as a society. But yeah, I mean, I think there are two things in terms of like the last exchange between you and Dean that I would like really quickly note. One of them is the idea that there are these certain beliefs that are kind of the accepted canonical beliefs minorities are supposed to have. So, I mean, like, Dean, when you're talking about you had Puerto Rican and black colleagues that would say, yeah, we don't want to release criminals back into working
Right.
class minority neighborhoods because they'll commit crimes. And you mentioned that other mostly white representatives would say, oh, can't say that and stay in this party. I mean,
Hmm.
that's deeply insane. And it's a real problem in upper middle class liberal circles, even just
Sure.
talking and living and going to cocktail parties, right? I
Yeah.
mean, so when you talk about just being in Minneapolis,
Hmm.
I looked at the breakdown of the Black Lives Matter rioters, like not protesters, the people that are actually arrested,
Sure. Sure.
actual
Oh yeah.
rioters,
How about
and
that?
something like 78% of them were white. So
Exactly. And
the
not even from Minnesota. They were
yeah,
provocateurs.
most of them,
Mhm.
well, 50-50. There was
About
some
half. Yeah.
local
Yeah.
blame, but like
Yeah.
most of them, yeah, they were people from all around that portion of the country that came into this particular city. Most of them weren't from Minneapolis. That's true.
Right.
And the area they set on fire was the traditional Asian and black business district of the city, as
Exactly.
I understand. So
Exactly.
you had this crazy image of a group that was about 80% white
Hmm.
burning down these black and Asian successful businesses while chanting Black Lives Matter. So you can be as angry as you want about the George Floyd situation,
Hmm.
which we don't need to unpack that right now. But like again, there are three cops there that were of minority heritage, so
Yep.
on. Chauvin had some
Yeah.
past complaints, but George Floyd himself, lengthy felony record, took a variety of drugs. Anyway, bad cops, no patience for that. But all of that, the follow up was this diverse group of mostly white rioters burning down a black business district. The people
Yeah.
that approved of that were almost all Caucasian. There was no nuance of this kind allowed. That's an
No.
issue. Second thing you brought up was Congress people spend almost all their time raising money.
Exactly.
And I actually have a question here. For the typical representative, you're not a millionaire, you don't have a
Hmm.
successful executive background,
Hmm.
make $140,000 a year before you come into the House. How much of your time would you say you spend focused on raising cash? Just
Oh,
straight up pressing flesh, dinners, bringing money in. What percent?
oh, Will, first of all, I'm fortunate. I was fortunate to be in a position to have, connections, a donor list, if you will. It's impossible. And no, even in my case, my first election, I had to spend about 40% of my time dialing for dollars. They'd hand
Yeah.
me a list with a bunch of numbers. I'd cold call people. It was humiliating, it was degrading, it was pathetic. And by the way, when you think about it, if you're calling people for money, who do you call? You call people who have it, right? So by definition,
Yeah,
you have
yeah, I've
both.
been on sales and trading floors. Yeah, you just
Yeah,
get the dentist and the phone book. Yeah,
of course.
it's the
So
Congress.
why do most Americans feel no one cares about them in Washington? Well, because when's the last time a politician called them? Democrats, Republicans calling people that are wealthy. And then they spend time with them because they go to gatherings and country clubs and boardrooms. And as a result, politicians have stopped hanging out with regular folks because half the time is spent raising money. So it's about 50%. Will, every time we had time after a vote, you'd see people run it, literally go across the street to the DCCC, the RNCC, and start. They literally have rooms dedicated to just calling people for money. They hand you the list. There are software companies that are focused on the software to go through the list. There are software companies that will dial 5 numbers at a time, and the one that connects first, you get. It's
Yeah,
pathetic, and
I
most
didn't know.
people, yeah.
Not to interrupt, but the congressman, him or herself, is cold calling. Like
Oh
it's
yeah,
not staff; it's just trading floor stuff. Like you've got the phone.
yeah. Now, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
ultimately on the phone, yes.
Selected list, the
Yeah,
selected
yeah,
list.
but it's
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's list. But there are a lot of programs now that will dial multiple numbers and only
Okay.
and then connect you to the one. By the way, I did want to say too, we were just talking about again George Floyd and some of these kind of linchpin moments that define the parties. Remember when Leah Thomas, the swimmer,
Yeah.
who had been a man and transitioned to a woman. That to me was probably the crossroads where Democrats really lost it and didn't realize at the time what was happening. Because I think, like most Americans, when anyone who might be a father or mother of a daughter who might be a young woman who spent her life in pursuit
Yeah.
of a swimming trophy and days in the pool, and then to make it that far and to come in second or third place to someone who had been a man before. That's something that it doesn't matter your politics. If you're the parent of a daughter, you can identify with how frustrating then. How would you have that talk with your daughter? And instead of Democrats saying, you know what, we get it. That's not something that we think should be the norm. We can defend the rights of anybody, but we really understand. We didn't do that. And if you dared say that, you risked drawing the entire ire of some of the most powerful groups, on the left. And that's why there was kind of silence. And it was that silence that was the message to centrist and right-leaning Americans, and frankly, even left-leaning Americans. That was bizarre. The
And you're
president didn't
you're
address it,
even
right?
being extra nice.
Yeah. What's that?
Because you're even being nice about it. Because really what they did, they didn't just say you must accept it. Yeah, I get it. Because they're like, they don't always lose whether you win or lose, but it's bigger than that. They celebrate. That's what I say. Celebrated it.
Yeah.
Put them on the magazine. So if
Right.
Riley Gaines came in second, or let's say Riley Gaines beat Leah, because Leah's the first, Leah would
Yeah.
still be on the magazine cover,
Yeah.
right? That's the kind of thing
That's
that
actually what happens. Like, I know Riley Gaines in like Kentucky social circles, and like both of them, the top four get trophies in these kind of events, and they finished in a split second tie. And normally, what you do is have all of them stand in a circle and put the trophy in the circle or something. You wouldn't humiliate any of the women. They actually explicitly gave Thomas the trophy because they wanted to make this kind of a civil rights Jackie Robinson moment. So like Riley Gaines in the photos is like to the side of the circle with the other women who had lost, and Leah Thomas is like holding the trophy because they wanted to make the point this is the first trans whatever. Leah Thomas, Will Thomas, is like a 6'2" male athlete who used to also play lacrosse and was like the number 300 something men's swimmer, which isn't bad at all, in the country at Penn the year before that. So the whole thing was just a farce. Leah Thomas has a penis, like, which is visible in the picture. So,
and two things can be true at once. Yeah, two things can be true at once, and this is where common sense comes in. In most, I think the state of Maine, I think there are two trans young people competing. I think we'd all agree, like, look, we don't want to hurt kids. We don't want kids to take their own lives because they can't feel. That's not what this is about. And I know Republicans don't want that, but when it does get to a point where Democrats, I think, can and should say, look, we can look at this in a nuanced way, which is, for kids where it's not gonna literally change the course of someone's life who's worked their tail off, right? It's different at that level, college or, and beyond. So it's that nuance that we lack. It's because there's only a left and a right and there's binary choices. I mean, not in this context, but you understand.
I didn't mean it that way.
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think this is one of the simpler choices here, honestly. Like, I don't think that mentally disturbed kids are going to kill themselves because you tell them they're not really non-binary and they have to play sports in the open division. Like, there's no evidence that that's ever happened. There's no evidence that youth suicide rates are up. I think what you do there is just enforce the anti-bullying policy. Like that's really it. There's no sign of any of this stuff. I myself am pretty concerned about kids. I teach at a college, and we looked at this when we were forming our anti-bullying or LGBT policies, and there's none of, I mean, like, youth rates of serious abuse, sexual abuse, all that is, as everyone on the panel probably knows, way down since the 70s. Even sex itself, to the point where it's kind of problematic, way down since the 70s. The idea that there was a massive, you could kind of track this, right? Like, if being misgendered or not taken seriously because you identify as trans and society won't recognize that, if that caused suicide, you would expect that for all of history, because society used to be much colder, you would have seen this bloodbath of these kids that were just murdering themselves, that were a bit feminine, and no one would have known why. And then you would have seen that stop, and that's not at all what we've seen. We've seen stability or maybe a slight increase. I mean, So no, I think if your kid tells you, Dad, I'm a girl, you can say, in this house you can be whatever you want. But if you're a boy who dresses in a feminine way, that doesn't make you a woman. And you put on a Prince album or something. Like the
Jesus.
the old sexual stereotypes are just the old sexual stereotypes. Like this seems like this is the pendulum, right? Like this is a
Oh,
backlash to the healthy part of 50 years of feminism. You
That's
don't
true.
have
And
to
I
be a
just, and
certain
by
way
the
to
way,
be a
I didn't
man,
want to, I want to,
except
I do,
Brady.
I do believe, I've never walked in the shoes of a trans person, especially young when I don't, my gut and my experience indicates that a lot of kids are suffering. By the way, all kids, not just trans. And maybe I misspoke about the rationale. It's to not exclude. I think we can be a country that allows kids who are going through that to be participants, and it's not going to ruin somebody else. And by the way, what a simple lens to look at policy in America. If it does not hurt somebody else, right? That's kind of the libertarian notion, right? If it doesn't hurt somebody else, but when it does, when it changes their life, when it affects their pursuit, their livelihood, I think we have to be mindful of that. And I think Republicans would agree we can be kind and compassionate to kids going through this, who feel this. And Democrats should be mindful of Americans who recognize, there comes a point where we can also, um, draw the line when it may be crossed. And I think that was a linchpin moment that I brought up only because I think Democrats really lost something, lost a lot of Americans on that subject, and then were made to feel shame if you felt differently, made to
right.
feel shame if you felt differently. And I would imagine every parent of a daughter in this country can empathize with that circumstance. And I think that's where Democrats allowed certain groups to represent the party in the absence of a strong leader. That's going to happen, and that's going to continue to happen. And by the way, it happens to Republicans because Donald Trump does his thing and turns off, about half the country all the time as well. This is not unique to one party or the other, my
Well,
friend.
that's true. I mean, I don't want to go too long because I know we run out of time, but I
Yeah,
wanted to just say the other thing that's important, the last thing I want to say about the trans issue isn't even about protecting, because you're right. No one wants, Democrat or Republican,
yeah,
wants anyone to be suicidal or wants to hurt anyone. But what it's doing, like I think Will's point about if the son comes home and says he's a girl, you can embrace them and let them transition in the home, but you can't make the rest of the society, you can't compel them to say that that child is a girl. And so, because when you talk about misgendering, you're basically saying, I see a boy, but the boy is living as a girl, says he's a trans woman, and everybody in his life accepts it. And so, therefore, if I don't, there should be some consequence. I think that's where the real problem is, is that how do you protect that person, give them their civil rights, but not force other people. So it's not really
yeah.
harming me, but you're forcing me. You're saying that I
Mhm.
must say, do, and act a certain way. And that's kind of a problem. That's, the other side of that I think is kind of hard to do, right? How do you
Hmm.
force somebody to say, but I see a boy, shut up, that's a girl. And if you don't say it's a boy, you lose your job or you lose your scholarship. I mean, that's a little too extreme.
Hmm.
Charles, as the woman, I guess I should say something. So when you say it's not harming, it actually is harming. I mean, it's
I didn't
harming a
say
lot
it
of,
wasn't harming. I'm saying that it may harm, but even in the sense where it's not harming, you still can't
right.
possibly do it. So if it's not harming me, like they know Dean, that I'm on the school board in New York, and they've been basically coming to the board every month calling me a transphobe, saying I'm literally killing kids, all this kind of stuff. That's not harming me, but
You
they don't
can't
get to
make
tell me
people
what to
change their
say though.
entire life. You can't make people change their entire life to accommodate someone else's mental illness.
No,
Right.
I think I feel compelled to say that, that when I hear someone say that's mental illness, it's not, I
It's the
struggle hearing
mental
that. I'm just
illness
gonna be
of gender
forthright. And
dysphoria.
I
It's still
feel,
in
I
the
feel
DSM
it's
five.
important to defend, I think that's important to defend,
So
people.
what do you think it is then? If it's
What,
not gender dysphoria, you just think so. It can only be one of two things. Either it's gender dysphoria, and they need to have compassion for it. The bottom line is that boy thinks he's a girl, or he really is a girl. Those are the only two options. There is no third option.
No, I understand. I'm just, I
Oh, I
think
thought you were
I just
saying
think the
you don't think it's gender
classification of mental
dysphoria. You
illness.
don't like the term
Yeah.
mental illness, is what you're saying. You don't
No,
like the.
I think that's offensive to people. And
Uh,
I'm looking,
so they do have gender
I'm
dysphoria. You
I'm
just don't
being,
like it being
I
called.
feel compelled on occasion to, I think that's a complicating factor using
Okay.
that term for people who,
So it's the
none
term.
of us, I've never,
Gotcha.
I've
I
not been in
think
their
I
shoes. I've not been
dislike.
in your shoes, but I think that's a little bit that make, let me just say this. I think that just as it relates to gun violence, when Democrats would say it's gun control, that's the answer. No, that ends the conversation. When we talk about this issue and the term, that's mental illness, I think that ends the conversation. I like kind of terminology and invitation to conversation.
Gotcha.
It should be gun violence prevention, and it should be thoughtful accommodation of every human in America, and also
Even if they have gender
protecting,
dysphoria.
kids who've been working their tails off, as a young man or a young
I think
woman.
we
I know
just
you got to
disagree on
reply.
this
We're
one.
getting
If
close, but go ahead.
you are a biological male and you think you're a girl, you can't play girl sports. I mean, there are things that just are true. Like when you say we want to accommodate people, we want to help people as much as possible. This is why the Democrats are losing on this issue. This is an 86-14 issue. And I'm sure you know the numbers
Agreed.
as much as I do. You're just probably a
Totally.
more empathic person. We can disagree on it. But like the reason it's an 86-14 issue is that people with penises are males. And most people don't want people with penises in girls' locker rooms. It really, and I want to hear Christie's position on this because it's sort of been the guys arguing on this one. But like, there's really just there's not a way to accommodate that. Now, I agree that leaders can sort of amorally look the other way. Frankly, like in Maine, where there are two trans athletes and they're not any good, I would never have done anything in the first place. Like,
Yeah.
but that's I think we all quietly are saying that. But in
Mhm.
terms of like, if someone is in the NCAA women's swim
That's different.
championships and they're yeah, but then they're going to finish number one. Like you can't do it. You've got
No.
to. There's got to be some kind of barrier. You might say, well, let's find a wrong conference or something. But like, if they're actually going to be in that race, you do have to have a policy that says no males at some point if they're still going to compete.
But to be fair,
But
Will, he's not disagreeing with you. He
Yeah.
he
that's not
doesn't
it.
like your terminology. He's saying that's not. He's
Right.
not saying they should be that he opened with saying that that's a problem. And that was a losing point of the
Then
Democratic.
come up with
I
the
mean,
mental illness version of undocumented migrants. It doesn't matter. It's the same thing though.
right.
Like
So
that would
that's
then
what you're
become the
disagreeing on.
stigmatized
That's right.
He
Yeah.
terminology.
thinks
That
it, he thinks
yeah.
it can.
I was defending those that would find that
Right. That's what he
classification.
was
That's
saying.
all. We're agreeing on.
My
Yeah.
my last point I want to make is it
Oh my
seems like
God.
you guys are using the isolated swim incident because that was the first one. But we are in the realm of girls are actually getting harmed. And they're getting seriously harmed because now you see it in basketball. You see girls being forced to, they're practically getting concussions because they're getting, hit hard with the ball coming down. Or you see women that are wrestling and they're being forced to wrestle a trans person and getting hurt. Or you've seen it in boxing, even, right?
Mhm.
So women are actually getting hurt because they are being forced to either quit. Some have just quit. I saw this boxing match and this girl just quit mid-round after getting hit by a guy one time. So women are actually getting harmed. The other thing is having a trans person in a locker room. I don't know, as men, you probably don't know what that would feel like, but it's a matter of safety. I mean, it's actual fear having a knowing that there's a man and being humiliated, having to undress and just knowing that a man's I stopped going to a gym because a trans person went to my gym and he would freak of the locker room. He also happened to be a school board member, but that's another story.
Ah,
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
so it is a matter of real harm that women
I,
are
I
feeling.
got you. I got you. I want to end by saying, um, Dean, you were in Minnesota, and we talked about George Floyd a couple of times. I want to make sure you did not wash black people's feet when George Floyd died, right?
Did I wash black people's feet when George Floyd died? Oy.
I know they were doing. Your mayor was
My
doing some crazy
microphone,
stuff. The
my
mayor was doing.
microphone just fell off. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
pushed the
Yeah.
microphone. I just check
Yeah.
it because the mayor was doing some crazy stuff when that happened. I want to make sure you
Yeah.
weren't
No, I
like,
got to tell you, that episode, I mean, that horrible episode, it really, that affected my community in ways that's really hard to express. And I'll tell you, I think we mistook quiet for peace for a long time. I think that's something that a lot of communities have to acknowledge, mistaking quiet for peace.
mhm.
And it just takes that spark, and that's what we had in Minneapolis. The cities have never been the same since. The divisions that occurred, the polarity politically and otherwise, it's really it's heartbreaking. And I just wish we could turn that horrible moment in American history into something more unifying and reasonable. And I think most Americans are there. We just need leaders to bring that out of us. And that's my hope.
Okay, and my last question to you is, I know you believe that we should have a third party. I'm on board if we can make that happen.
Mhm.
But in lieu of that, and or
Mhm.
even with that, because that may take a while,
Sure.
what do you see happening? I mean, the polarization's still there. Trump,
Yeah.
in all his oddities, I've been saying in the last couple of weeks, it's been because it's surreal for me to see. I never expected to see it because I would
Mhm.
see some things I liked, and then when I didn't like it, I just rolled my eyes. I didn't like the left think it was the end of the world, but I was like, oh,
Sure.
that's so silly. But I never thought I'd see him finding a way to make Democrats strongly argue for things that no one wants, like standing out on the street talking about, we want more MS-13 criminals in us. They're screaming for all this nonsense, right?
Mhm.
So fighting again, I know you made a comment on, was it CNN where you were talking about Doge? So I'm talking about work with them and get it right, as opposed to
Sure.
being the weirdos seeming odd on TV saying, no, we don't want to cut waste. Because of course people
Yeah.
are going to be like, of course we want to cut waste. We
Yeah.
want to do it responsibly. But so where do you see this going?
Well, I tell you, for Democrats, I mean, most legislative bodies have caucuses that affiliate based on policy or position. The Democratic caucus in Congress affiliates by identity. We have the Congressional Black Caucus, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, that are the largest of the two. And when we talked about earlier, they're just two parties. They're not actually. You could argue we have many more than two parties within the parties. And by definition, the Black Caucus is a unique party, I would argue, within the Democratic caucus, the Hispanic caucus, because they have very distinct positions. They vote as a bloc, and that, for all intents and
And no one
purposes,
else can
are
join.
parties. And of course, I'm not. I mean, we're the Big Tent party. I mean, I'm not going to make jokes of this, but no, I can't join the Hispanic caucus. And by the way, there's not a caucus that represents my identity. I mean,
Oh, well, we don't want to talk about your identity.
and by the way, and I'm not even trying. I'm not trying to be just. What I'm
Advocating for it, right?
saying is, you ask where it's going to go. I think we're going, as long as we affiliate by our identity within the Democratic Party and use that as the primary qualifier, acid test, and the like, and we don't prioritize policies that help everybody economically and otherwise. I think it's going to be a losing proposition, and I think this was the beginning of that migration away from the party that it identifies. And I think we're forgetting about a lot of reasonable white folks out there who are increasingly finding it hard to hang on to a party that is not just ignoring them, but is kind of making them feel a little bit ashamed. And that's a little bit odd. And I'll just close with this because it was a bizarre and interesting epiphany. When I was campaigning in New Hampshire during the presidential primary, I saw a MAGA rally across the street from my rally. I had 200 people. Trump had thousands, of course. And they were sitting outside in the cold, lined up on a sidewalk hours before the event. And I walked over. Camera crews followed me. I spent about an hour there, probably spoke to 40, 50 people. Could not have been more friendly. They could not have been more hospitable, more kind, more diverse. And I really realized, like, here I was, and I wanted to scream from the rooftops, like, I was really treated nicely. A Democratic presidential candidate at a MAGA rally was treated really nicely by people. And man, when I started telling people that in the halls of Congress, they wanted me to shut up and then I said it on CNN and people talk smack about me on Twitter only because I said I was treated nicely. And I thought to myself, holy moly, Ollie, as my father used to say. So the fact is this, not all Democrats are bad, not all Republicans are bad, just the opposite. Most are good. It's the people that are supposed to be representing that are really doing a poor job. And whether it's a third party or inspiring young people to participate or all of us getting people to go out and vote in primaries, we have the tools at our disposal. We just have to inspire it and stop complaining and start doing something.
Well,
So that's my
it's been
close.
great having you. I love what you're talking about. We'll see what happens. I know you're going to, based on the tone and your passion, you're going to keep fighting. The question is, are you going to be fighting from within the Democrat Party or without? I won't force you to answer that question. Yes.
Thank you.
Dean Phillips. Dean, thanks for joining us. It's been
Hey,
great.
thank you all. Keep the faith.
Have a good one.
Patriot J, I'm saving the day from you commies who lame. No, you can't fuck with me. I got a country to save. God bless. as the US of A. Land of the free and a home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to save, cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving a day.